For 200 standard cycles, the Krill Empire had known only triumph. From the glittering core worlds of Krill Prime to the furthest reaches of the Galactic Rim, their power was absolute, their authority unquestioned. The Krill, with their towering tripedal forms and minds honed by millennia of military doctrine, viewed the lesser species of the galaxy with a mixture of detached management and utter contempt. They were the architects of order, the purveyors of civilization, and their fleets were the iron fist that maintained galactic peace. A peace, of course, defined by Krill dominance. And then there were the humans. In the vast, intricate web of galactic politics, humanity was less a thread and more afraid, insignificant knot tied on the very edge of the map. Their home system Sol was deemed irrelevant, possessing marginal resources and a disturbing history of self-inflicted conflict. To the Krill, who had long ago perfected their society into a model of cold, efficient logic, humans were an embarrassing anomaly. They were volatile, emotional, and distressingly prone to irrational acts of sentimentality. Their ships were crude, their technology a messy synthesis of salvaged components and overly complex jury-rigging, and their brief interstellar efforts were usually hampered by internal disputes or a baffling disregard for profit margins. Admiral Vakar, the sector commander of the Krill Third Fleet, had the misfortune of being the first high-ranking officer to deal directly with the human nuisance. His task was simple: secure the Cygnus Rift border system, a resource-rich nebula that the Krill Empire had recently claimed. The problem? A small, struggling human colony had been established on one of the system's marginal, gas-choked moons, a world the humans inexplicably named New Hope. Vakar's message to the human colony was a model of Krill efficiency: direct, irrefutable, and entirely devoid of negotiation. Evacuate within 72 hours or face immediate removal. He expected compliance. All lesser species complied. Compliance was the logical, survivable choice. The humans, however, did not comply. The response from New Hope was signed by a civilian governor named Elias Vance. It was short, polite, and completely incomprehensible to the Krill mind. It simply read, "We've put too much sweat equity into this rock to pack up now. Tell your admiral thanks, but no thanks. This is our home." Admiral Vakar was not angry. Krill did not permit the inefficiency of anger. He was irritated. This was less a geopolitical conflict and more akin to dealing with a persistent fungal growth. He ordered a single cruiser, the Aegis of Krell, to perform a low-altitude orbital pass and disable the colony's orbital defenses, a necessary formality, as he assumed their meager shielding would barely qualify as defenses at all. What followed became an instant legend, whispered across the comms of every Krill ship for years to come. The Aegis of Krill, a vessel armed with plasma cannons and protected by multi-layered gravitational shielding, reported successful deployment of their disabling beam, targeting what they believed to be a power relay. The human response was instantaneous and totally unexpected. The orbital station, which the Krill had dismissed as an outdated relic, did not fire plasma, nor did it attempt to raise a shield. Instead, a small, ridiculously fast projectile, barely the size of a shuttle, shot up from the colony and collided with the Aegis's starboard engine housing. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. The human projectile, which Krill analysts later determined was a hastily repurposed mining drill head equipped with a crude proximity fuse and a ridiculously oversized chemical reaction warhead, tore through the Aegis's main engineering hull. The great cruiser, built to withstand asteroid impacts and full-scale naval assaults, tumbled, crippled, and burning through the upper atmosphere. It was a humiliating, impossible defeat, a flagship disabled by a piece of glorified plumbing. Vakar's irritation evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical curiosity. He reviewed the damage reports, the casualty lists, and the intelligence files on humanity. The conclusion was always the same: primitive, disorganized, non-threat. Yet the evidence now defied the logic. His subsequent report to Krill High Command was a masterpiece of controlled understatement. Human forces display unpredictable tactical ingenuity. Recommend immediate deployment of a full squadron to secure the Cygnus Rift and neutralize the human presence. They are not merely inefficient, they are illogical. The Krill High Command, secure in their fortress-like arrogance, scoffed. They authorized the deployment, but simultaneously reprimanded Vakar for his excessive caution and alarmist rhetoric. They still believed humanity was an inferior species that could be crushed with minimal force. They failed to understand that the human spirit, when cornered, did not comply with logic. It simply found the nearest heavy object, put an explosive on it, and aimed it at the heart of the problem. That terrifying, inexplicable adaptability was about to shock an entire galactic empire. Admiral Vakar arrived at the Cygnus Rift with the 4th Strike Squadron, a formation of 12 powerful destroyers, 4 heavy cruisers, and his new flagship, the Krill dreadnought Iron Will. He was not taking any more chances. The humiliation of the Aegis of Krill incident demanded a response of overwhelming, undeniable power. His analysis, which he kept close, suggested that the humans' successful attack had been a fluke, a desperate, lucky shot. But a chilling possibility had taken root in his mind. What if that crude, improvised aggression was not an exception, but the rule? He initiated a tight, impenetrable blockade around New Hope. Before he could issue the final ultimatum, the humans messaged him again. This time, it was a data burst containing no words, only a complex mathematical formula and a series of seemingly random, rapidly changing telemetry readings. Krill analysts, perplexed, eventually deciphered the message. It was a live, encrypted feed of their own squadron's gravitational sensor readings, complete with subtle, minute fluctuations that only Krill high-level technicians could possibly detect. It was a warning. The humans were not only watching the Krill fleet, they had somehow penetrated their encrypted long-range sensor networks and were letting Vakar know with chilling precision that they knew exactly where he was. The conflict began not with a grand naval engagement, but with a series of frustrating, baffling skirmishes. Vakar's plan was to systematically eliminate the orbital defenses, but the humans had no static defenses. Their defense consisted of swarms of repurposed single-pilot tugboats and mining drones, small, agile, and seemingly worthless vessels. These ships were not equipped with standard weapons. They were equipped with construction lasers cranked up to dangerous levels, salvaged welding torches, and what looked suspiciously like large, reinforced industrial harpoons. They were not built to fight, they were built to work. In a traditional engagement, Krill destroyers would simply vaporize them, but the human pilots did not engage in traditional combat. They flew with a reckless abandon that defied all tactical norms. They didn't try to defeat the Krill ships. They flew suicide runs directly toward the engine vents, the sensor arrays, and the less armored joints of the massive Krill hulls. One Krill cruiser, the Vigilance, reported damage after a human tugboat deliberately collided with its rear communications dish. The tugboat was destroyed instantly, but the blast from its overpressurized fusion drive, intentionally rigged for maximum kinetic release, managed to crack the cruiser's outer shell and disable its primary long-range comms. Admiral Vakar watched the battle feed, his composure fracturing slightly. They are expending resources disproportionately. They sacrifice a unit for a minor tactical advantage. This is inefficient warfare. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Sorrell, a younger officer already unnerved by the conflict, responded hesitantly. Admiral, their losses are significant, yes, but their pilots are... They are not retreating. They fight until their vessel is reduced to debris, and their replacements are immediately launching. The humans were fighting an economic war of attrition, but with a horrifying twist. They were sacrificing life, the most valuable resource, as if it were expendable. And in doing so, they were inflicting disproportionate damage to the Krill fleet's operational capacity. Krill technology was designed to withstand warships, not kamikaze runs by civilian garbage haulers. The Krill destroyers, unable to track the small, fast, chaotic human craft, were forced to slow down. Their tactical formation compromised by the swarm. Vakar ordered a massive missile barrage to clear the swarm. The Krill missiles were fast, guided, and devastating. But again, the human response was baffling. They didn't use electronic countermeasures. Instead, they began broadcasting civilian chatter on the Krill targeting frequencies. It was a cacophony of sound, music, static, human voices talking about trivialities, family gatherings, and, disturbingly, recipes. The Krill missile guidance systems, designed to filter out natural interference, were overwhelmed by the sheer, unbridled chaos of human-level noise pollution. The missiles became disoriented, veering wildly, some even colliding with one another. It was a ridiculous, cheap, and shockingly effective countermeasure. The Krill destroyers, finally able to break through the drone swarm, descended on New Hope. They prepared to bombard the colony with orbital plasma. The moment the plasma cannons charged, however, a single solitary human ship, the one Krill analysts had designated as the Command Frigate, jumped out of FTL, appearing directly in the firing path. It was the UNS Odyssey, an ugly, boxy ship that was clearly years, if not decades, behind Krill design. It didn't fire. It simply positioned itself in a passive, non-aggressive posture directly over the central residential dome of the colony, its own shields minimal. It was a visual shield, a blockade made of sacrifice. The Krill targeting systems locked on, but Admiral Vakar hesitated. To fire now would guarantee the immediate destruction of the human command frigate, but it would also instantly vaporize a massive civilian population. Vakar could not process the risk. Krill military doctrine dictated that collateral damage was acceptable, but to intentionally fire on a stationary, unarmed vessel sheltering civilians was an act of extreme brutality that would violate every treaty and shatter the Krill's carefully constructed image as the Galactic peacekeepers. He realized the true horror of the human tactic. They had forced him into a moral trap. They had weaponized their own existence, making the destruction of their military asset a political impossibility. "Hold fire!" Vakar ground out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The humans are deploying terror tactics. They are using their own species as a shield. This is unconscionable, illogical." But as he looked at the grainy image of the Odyssey, battered and small, he saw something else. He saw not a terrorist shield, but a line in the sand. A profound, inexplicable promise: you will not touch our homes. The Krill Empire, built on the rigid foundation of logic and military might, was utterly confounded by a species whose greatest weapon was its defiant, unbreakable will. Admiral Vakar had won the battle but lost the war, at least the strategic one. The Krill Empire's media blackout on the Cygnus Rift incident was already failing. Whispers of the Aegis's demise and the moral trap involving the Odyssey had reached other species, and for the first time in centuries, the Krill were being laughed at. The narrative had shifted. The mighty Krill fleet, paralyzed by a handful of angry humans in welding torch-equipped space tugs. The shame was unbearable. Vakar's orders from high command were absolute: crush the rebellion, neutralize the threat, restore Krill dominance. He began his new campaign with textbook precision. He deployed automated mine layers to cordon off the Cygnus Rift, sealing the human colony in. He positioned his destroyers far enough away to avoid any further tugboat-based surprises, intending to starve the colony into submission. Logically, it should have worked. Humans had limited supplies, and their erratic FTL jumps were predictable at range. But the humans were already adapting. They weren't just running cargo. They were playing a dangerous game of interstellar hide-and-seek. Human FTL drives, unlike the efficient, stable Krill versions, were notoriously unpredictable, prone to wild, short-range jumps with high risk of collision. The Krill viewed this as a flaw. The humans viewed it as an advantage. Krill sensor nets were designed to predict precise FTL emergence points based on physics. Human pilots, however, were deliberately overriding their safety protocols and introducing controlled chaos into their jumps, a concept that broke Krill physics modeling. They called it slingshot jumping. A human pilot would make a micro-jump, emerge in an unexpected spot just kilometers from a Krill sensor array, drop a payload, and jump again before the Krill computers could even lock a target. These payloads were the new wave of terror. They were not missiles. They were modified cryogenic containers filled with supercooled scrap metal and kinetic material, designed to act like a massive high-velocity shotgun blast at close range. One day, the destroyer Justice reported a sudden breach in its primary environmental shielding. Analysis showed no energy signature, no missile debris, only a massive impact of hundreds of small, high-velocity objects. A human pilot had jumped into the middle of the Justice's formation, dropped its scrap metal payload, and jumped out before the Krill ship could register the threat. The shrapnel, moving at near-light speed, punched holes in vulnerable sensor vanes, comms antennae, and power conduits. The Justice was not destroyed, but it was crippled, blind, deaf, and unable to fire its main cannon. Vakar felt a cold dread settle in his primary processing cluster. This was not war. This was creative vandalism on a cosmic scale. The humans were weaponizing their technical limitations. Their chaotic FTL drives, their crude kinetic weapons, their willingness to fly small, disposable craft, all of it was being leveraged as an advantage against the Krill's reliance on predictable, large-scale technology. He ordered his interceptors to engage. The Krill interceptors were fast, sleek, and equipped with superior targeting computers. But the human tugboat pilots, now veteran daredevils, flew with a reckless lack of concern for G-forces or hull integrity. They pushed their ships to the absolute limit, performing maneuvers that would kill a Krill pilot instantly, turned so sharp they deformed the metal of their own ships. The Krill interceptors, prioritizing their own structural integrity and pilot safety, simply could not keep up with the humans' literal death wish flying. The true shock came when a detachment of Krill Marines boarded a captured human transport ship. The mission was to retrieve intelligence. What they found defied belief. The ship was riddled with flaws, patched with questionable wiring, and the airlock seals were leaking. But every square centimeter was packed with improvised defenses. The human crew had turned the ship into a mobile booby trap. The main corridor was lined with concealed flamethrowers fashioned from maintenance torches and fuel lines. The engine room was rigged with flashbang grenades made from repurposed signal flares. The human intelligence was not in datapads. It was in their willingness to sacrifice the ship and themselves to take out the boarding party. The Krill Marines suffered their first ground casualties, not in a firefight, but in a chaotic, close-quarters trap sprung by 3 human maintenance workers armed with pipe wrenches and a profound hatred for invaders. Admiral Vakar finally understood. The humans did not fear death. They embraced it, weaponized it, and used it as a tactical resource. Their emotionality, which the Krill had dismissed as a weakness, was their true strength. It allowed them to commit to acts of absolute suicidal courage that no logical Krill soldier could ever comprehend. His mind flashed back to the Odyssey, the ship that acted as a shield. It wasn't a terrorist act. It was a profound, defiant act of maternal protection, a willingness to die for the survival of the collective. Not through logical calculation, but through fierce, unyielding love. Vakar's arrogance was gone. It was replaced by a cold, calculating respect. He sent a new revised report to High Command, a report that ended with a single horrifying conclusion. The human is a singular threat. Their technology is primitive, but their will is absolute. They are the only species in the galaxy that weaponizes despair. We must either retreat or commit the full force of the Empire to their annihilation. Anything less will result in our operational collapse. The Krill Empire was panicking. They were no longer fighting a war. They were fighting a species that refused to follow the script. Krill High Command, finally shaken by Vakar's grim assessment and the mounting humiliation in the Cygnus Rift, dispatched the first strike armada, the jewel of the Krill fleet. Over 100 capital ships led by the mighty dreadnought Emperor's Pride. This was no mere punitive force. It was the entire galactic military's reserve power, deployed to ensure the total, absolute annihilation of the human threat. They had finally grasped the existential nature of the conflict. The arrival of the Armada was a spectacle of power, a glorious, horrifying tide of disciplined military might. The sheer gravitational distortion was enough to shake the distant colony of New Hope. The Krill message was sent not from Vakar, but from the Fleet Marshal himself. Surrender, or be cleansed from the star charts. The human response was the ultimate act of defiance. The UNS Odyssey, battered but still functional, along with every remaining tugboat, transport, and mining drone, exited the nebula and flew directly toward the approaching armada, a handful of motes against an ocean of steel. They were not attempting to fight. They were attempting to intercept. Admiral Vakar, whose fleet was now integrated into the armada, understood the chilling implication immediately. The humans were not a fighting force. They were a distraction for a larger, final act. He broke formation and sent a frantic warning to the fleet marshal. "They are drawing us into the Cassian void. Do not engage! Their actions are illogical and suicidal, a diversion." The fleet marshal, arrogant and confident in the face of the meager human fleet, ignored Vakar. "Logic dictates they will scatter. Engage the enemy and secure the Cygnus Rift." The Krill armada, with its vast power, accelerated toward the human fleet. The humans, flying with impossible, chaotic abandon, led the great Krill ships into a desolate, uncharted region known for its unstable gravitational fields and unpredictable quantum eddies, the Cassian Void. As the Krill ships entered the region, the human vessels began to perform a complex, synchronized maneuver, the last, desperate tactic devised by the engineers of New Hope. Every human ship, from the Odyssey down to the smallest drone, simultaneously overloaded their FTL drives and jettisoned their highly volatile plasma core reactors into the gravitational eddies of the void. It was a chain reaction designed not to destroy the ships, but to destabilize the entire region. The massive simultaneous energy releases, amplified by the natural quantum instability of the void, caused a cascading chain of micro-rifts, localized tears in space-time that were too small to be catastrophic, but devastating enough to disrupt every sensor, shield, and FTL drive in the immediate vicinity. The first strike armada was instantly blinded, paralyzed, and unable to move. Their sophisticated, delicate Krill systems, designed for perfect efficiency and order, were utterly wrecked by the chaotic, localized physics disruption. Ships that relied on synchronized movement and precision targeting were now colliding with one another, their power grids flickering uselessly. And then, the true horror was revealed. The human ships, now silent and drifting derelicts, were not the main weapon. They were the bait. From the blackness of the uncharted space beyond the void, a single, massive, utterly terrifying ship emerged. It was not a conventional warship. It was the UNS Leviathan, the first and only human-generation ship, an ark designed centuries ago to carry 1,000 people across the stars on a decades-long journey. It was slow, ugly, and designed for one thing: self-sufficiency. The Krill sensors screamed a warning. The Leviathan was not designed for war, but its massive, reinforced hull was built to withstand 1,000 years of space debris and radiation. Its massive power core, designed to maintain a self-contained ecosystem for generations, was now rerouted. Its weapons were not plasma cannons. They were gigantic, repurposed mass drivers, planetary defense coil guns designed to launch massive, relativistic payloads of nickel-iron ore. The Krill had been fighting a skirmish fleet. The humans had used the conflict to buy time for their true final weapon to be refitted. The Leviathan opened fire. Moving with slow, inexorable power, it began to systematically batter the paralyzed Krill armada. A single sluggish kinetic slug, moving at a fraction of light speed, could punch clean through a Krill destroyer's shields and hull, disabling it instantly. It was crude, simple, and horrifyingly effective against a fleet designed to deflect energy, not mass. The Krill dreadnought Emperor's Pride, the jewel of the fleet, was its main target. The Leviathan fired relentlessly, its massive frame absorbing the return fire from the few functional Krill weapons. Admiral Vakar, watching from his flagship, saw the Emperor's Pride shudder under the relentless assault of heavy metal. He finally understood the human sacrifice. The Odyssey, the tugboats, the pilots, the engineers. They had all died to buy the Leviathan the few precious moments it needed to arrive, to fire, and to destroy the Empire's heart. With the Emperor's Pride finally crippled and exploding in a catastrophic ball of energy, Vakar did the one thing that no Krill admiral had ever done in the history of the Empire. He ordered a full, unconditional tactical retreat and sent a priority transmission to the Krill High Command. His message was not a request for reinforcements. It was a plea for peace. The retreat of the First Strike Armada marked the definitive end of the human-Krill war. The Krill Empire had not been defeated by superior technology or military strategy. It had been defeated by unyielding, illogical human desperation. The news of the Leviathan's terrifying kinetic barrage and the complete paralysis of the Armada sent shockwaves across the entire galactic civilization. The Krill, who had feared and then dismissed humanity, were now paralyzed by a deep, profound respect bordering on terror. Admiral Vakar, though officially censured for his initial softness, was quietly promoted. He was the only Krill leader who truly understood the nature of the human spirit, and he was chosen to lead the first formal diplomatic mission to the new, recognized human sphere. The Krill delegation, meticulously chosen for their capacity for analytical processing and emotional control, arrived at the New Hope colony. They found a world rebuilding, scarred but not broken. The atmosphere was one of grim determination, not triumph. Governor Elias Vance met the delegation at the newly constructed orbital station. The Krill expected to be met with arrogance, gloating, or demands for massive reparations. They were instead met with a simple, pragmatic request. We need fuel for the Leviathan, medical supplies for our wounded, and help rebuilding the power grid. We'll pay in scrap metal and asteroid mining contracts. Vakar looked at Vance, a small, unassuming man with kind eyes and hands calloused by labor. Governor Vance, Vakar stated, his voice a steady monotone. You have crippled our first armada. You have shocked the galaxy. You have earned the right to demand worlds. Vance smiled, a tired, genuine human smile. Admiral, we're not interested in your worlds. We're interested in our world. We fought this war to be left alone, not to start another one. We just want to fix our home and get back to work. This was the true, final shock for the Krill. They had expected conquest. The humans simply wanted peace and a repair kit. Over the following cycles, the diplomatic relations solidified, evolving from wary ceasefire to grudging partnership. The Krill learned about humanity's illogical systems, their democratic process, their literature, their love of music, and their profound, inexplicable drive to protect the weak. Vakar spent countless hours with human engineers and historians trying to map the human mind. He finally understood the tactical advantage of their greatest weakness, emotion. He realized the Krill had achieved perfection, but in doing so, they had sacrificed adaptability. They had perfected the logical response to a known threat, but they had no defense against the illogical, the desperate, or the suicidal. He delivered a final, historic address to the Krill High Council, a speech that completely rewrote Krill military doctrine. We once feared the humans for their chaos, and then we dismissed them for their weakness. We were wrong on both counts. Their chaos is not a flaw. It is their ultimate weapon of flexibility. Their emotionality is not weakness. It is the wellspring of infinite, reckless courage. We saw a small vessel sheltering a colony and called it a terror tactic. They called it home. We calculated the risks of a salvage tug pilot, and they saw a brother willing to die for a second's advantage. He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The humans are a species that weaponizes their limitations and uses their hearts as their shield. They do not fight for territory, but for an idea of survival that we cannot comprehend. The only way to win a war against the humans is never to start one. The Krill Empire, humbled and permanently shaken, finally understood. The species they had underestimated, the emotional, messy, wonderful, and terrifying creatures of the Sol system, had shown them that true galactic power was not measured in plasma cannons or shield strength, but in the unbreakable, illogical spirit of those willing to sacrifice everything for a single, small world they called home. The Galactic Empire did not panic at the sight of the human warship. They panicked at the sight of the human will. The Krill Empire had learned to respect humanity, not as an equal, but as the most dangerous and awe-inspiring force in the entire galaxy.